of the life of Christ. We do 2 quarters on it. So let's kind of see where we are for those of us who were in here and those who were not. Kind of get you a starting place here. We looked at this outline of the life of Christ last quarter, early in the quarter. Did not look at it much later on, but we divide the life of Christ into 7 periods. The first 30 years being the time he was just growing up until he went to be baptized by John, which lasted 30 years. And then, and these times are all approximate, about 6 months in the beginning of the ministry. And then we spent a lot of time last quarter in the Galilean area, we call it the Great Galilean Ministry, or the time he spent in Galilee preaching the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Send his 12 out, they preached the same thing. And then we wound up the last part of last quarter with it's called the period of retirements, when Jesus retired, took himself back away from the crowds, tried to, in order to spend more time, it seems, with his apostles and the mission they would have after he was gone. So we're going to stop right there, do a short review of that period, and then we'll pick back up before we are with this. So getting into a review of the periods of retirement. This is like a 50,000 foot view, as they say. First time Jesus went over to Bethsaida, which is on the northeast corner of the Sea of Galilee, with his apostles, and then the multitudes followed him around the sea. And this is the time. There's a couple of shots, the sea in the background, Sea of Galilee, and the green grass. It's springtime. It's April, this time of year. We'll see in a minute. And then another shot of that. So it's Passover time. It's April of the year. And this is the time of the feeding of the 5,000. This is the only miracle that's recorded in all 4 of the Gospels, the feeding of the 5,000. And that occurs here at this time. And we're 1 year away from Jesus' crucifixion. So Passover next year is when he will be crucified. So feeding of the 5,000 happened at this time. Then the second retirement, he takes the apostles and he goes up to the region of Tyre and Sidon, up in the Phoenician area on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. And of course, Sea of Galilee, you see way down here at the bottom. Whoops, back up. Sea of Galilee way down here in the bottom area, so that we're way up to the north up here with this one. This is where he heals the Gentile woman's daughter at the breadcrumbs that fell from the master's table thing. Then the next retirement, he comes back now down toward the Sea of Galilee, and it's going to come down to the east side, way down the east side, in the area of the Decapolis. And this is the time we actually have the feeding of the 4,000. As they fall in there, been listening to him for 3 days. Some of them had a great distance to go home, they didn't have food. So he fed the 4,000 at this time with the 7 loaves and a few fishes. Then leaving here, he goes across the sea to the area of Magdala. And then the next retirement we see, they go up to Bethsaida and then leave there and go north again up to the area of Caesarea Philippi. And if you remember, this is Matthew chapter 16, 17 time frame here. Just above Caesarea Philippi, which is here, is Mount Hermon, which will come into play here in just in a minute. So here's Caesarea Philippi. Here's Mount Hermon up here. This is Dan, the northern post part. When you think about the land of Israel from Dan to Beersheba, Dan there. This is the time when Jesus asked his apostles, "Who do men say that I am?" And they say, "John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, one of the great prophets." And then he turned around and asked him, "Who do you say that I am?" That's when Peter made his confession in Matthew chapter 16. Shot from the Caesarea Philippi area. And then after this, he takes Peter, James, and John up into the mountain, probably Mount Hermon. Some people say it could be Mount Tabor back down in Galilee. Well, this is Mount Hermon in the background. And where he's changed, Moses and Elijah appear there at the Transfiguration, Matthew 17. So that kind of catches up a quick view of the periods of retirement, the 4 retirements he did, and what went on briefly with each one of those. So that brings us down to where we're ready to start this quarter, with the close of the ministry. Last 6 months, and then the last week, and then the resurrection and exaltation. So as we get started with today, we're going to start off with the Feast of the Tabernacles. And it's going to be, of course, in Jerusalem. And we're in John chapter 7. By the way, if you heard Steve's radio program this morning, I thought to say it could be just kind of be dismissed because he took John chapter 7 and just dissected it in the first part of the radio program this morning. And I said, oh, wait a minute, that's what we got to talk about. So we're in John chapter 7, and there's no bouncing around today. It's all in John 7 and John 8. So the Feast of the Tabernacles, of course, goes back to Leviticus when they were leaving the land of Egypt, traveling around in the wilderness. A couple of important things back in history that happened at the Feast of Tabernacles would be the dedication of Solomon's temple. Back when he built the new temple, that would happen at the Feast of Tabernacles. And then remember when Ezra called all the people back to repentance and had the big turnaround after the captivity and the return. That again ties into the timing of the Feast of Tabernacles. So it happens in September, October time frame. So we're in the fall of the year now. It's also known as the Feast of Booths because they would dwell in booths, temporary dwellings to reminisce of what their forefathers had done, and they travel around in the wilderness out there and living in the temporary dwellings out there then. Also called the Feast of Ingatherings because they would gather the harvest in. Again, the fall of the year, harvest time for that. So this is the Feast of Tabernacles, and it's one of those feasts where all the male Jews had to go to Jerusalem for the feast and be there. So, and tied in with that is the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement was a super special day to the children of Israel. Thinking back to the tabernacle and then to the temple, you have the holy place and the most holy place. Of course, in the most holy place is the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat, cherubim, God's dwelling place among the people. And God had told Moses, you tell Aaron, he doesn't come in there when he wants to. Only one time a year. So the most holy place is set up there, and only one day out of the whole year does anybody go in the most holy place. And that's the high priest on the Day of Atonement. And he goes there and he appears before the Lord, sprinkling the blood, confessing the sins of the people, and they offer a lot of sacrifices, and then they have two goats. You remember the story of the scapegoat. One of the goats is killed, the blood sprinkled, and the other goat is, the high priest lays his hands on them for the sins of the people, and he is taken to the woods and set free. So that's the Day of Atonement, and that's tied in the same time in here as the Feast of the Tabernacles. Read one verse, Hebrews 9, verse 7, ties into this here. But into the second part, the high priest went alone once a year, not without blood, which he offered for himself and for the sins of the people committed in ignorance. So this is when the high priest went in once a year to offer the sacrifice in the most holy place and appear before God for the sins of the people. So we're now 6 months that Jesus will die. 6 months. Feast of Tabernacles, September, October. Jesus is going to die in April at the Feast of Passover. So we got about 6 months left here. But they already want to kill him. The Jews are. So when we say the Jews are wanting to kill Jesus, we got to kind of clarify that a little bit. It's not everybody in the Jewish nation is wanting to kill him. So you think about the Jews, you think about the nation itself, all the people. And then you come down to the leaders of the Jews. And really the ones that are really trying to kill Jesus kind of come down to two groups. And that is mainly the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin. Of course, the Sanhedrin is the high court. It's the Supreme Court as far as the Jews are concerned. 70 men plus the high priest would be on the Sanhedrin. There's nearly no record that I know of how they're selected, who's on the Sanhedrin. But it's that court there. During this time, under the Roman rule, it seemed like their jurisdiction was limited just to Judea, not the broad thing it might have been in days earlier. And of course, they had no power to put anybody to death, even though the law of Moses required death. And we'll see a little bit later on in the lesson this morning. The law of Moses required death. The Jews, because of the Roman control, could not put anybody to death. That's why they get to the Romans to kill Jesus. But Sanhedrin would normally have had that power to do that. They had their own soldiers, their own guards, and we'll see them used here in a few minutes. So they're a pretty powerful bunch, but a little controlled now because of the Roman rule of the land. Pharisees in Galilee had already been trying to find a way to put Jesus to death, mentioned in Matthew chapter 12. And now the Jews in Jerusalem, if you go back to John chapter 5, John chapter 5 is where the Jesus healed on the Sabbath. And beyond that, he said he put himself equal with God, called God my Father. And of course, that was just all they needed to take the Sabbath day and defy it, according to what the Jews were saying. And of course, healing on the Sabbath was work, and then putting Jesus with his Father was blasphemy. So they had all they wanted to try to kill him with. So both in Galilee and in Jerusalem, the Jews, or the Jewish leaders, are after him to try to kill him. So Jesus is in Galilee. So if we wind him up with the periods of retirement, we talked in the last lesson about his brothers were going to go down to the feast when Jesus is going to come. And he did not go when everybody else went to go down there. He said, my time has not yet come. Don't know if he felt like if he went down openly to start with, that they would try to take him and kill him then, what it is. But the brothers went on, then he came down later in the feast. And these Jewish, again, the leaders, they're looking for him. They're watching for him. They're waiting for him to get there because, again, they are after him to kill him. And John chapter 7 is a mixture of how different people feel about Jesus and his teaching at this point in time. That's just kind of a summary of the whole chapters. We get lots of different people with a lot of different ideas and about what Jesus is, who he is, what he is, where he came from, and how they should be treating him here. A lot of mixed sentiments about him at this point. But he went to the temple, and he was teaching openly there in the temple. As one of the rabbis might sit and teach, people would come in and listen to him as he spoke in the temple grounds there. They wanted to know, where does this man get this learning? They knew that he had not studied under one of the big rabbis, like we talk about Paul under Gamaliel or something like that. So where does man from Galilee get this learning? Where did he get this knowledge he's doing to teach with here? So they were confused about that. He would tell them that my doctrine or my teaching is from God. It's from my Father. He uses that phrase in there. I came to do God's will, was what he would tell them. So the doctrine is not from me. You're going to accept me. We'll talk about his Father more here in a minute. But he ties himself very much to his Father, which, of course, is going to make the Jews that much worse. He told them I didn't come to seek my own glory. And we'll touch on that again just in a minute, too, about the glory in John chapter 17. We'll talk about that in half a second. But I came to give glory to the one who sent me, to God. That's where that was. So he asked them, why do you want to kill me? Why are you seeking to kill me? This word crazy is my word here. The people, what do you mean trying to kill you? Who wants to kill you? Because the common people who were hearing him teach didn't realize that the leaders, the Jewish leaders, were wanting to kill him. So when he says, why are you trying to kill me? Then they didn't understand why he's asked this question. It's the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees is wanting to kill him, not the everyday common people. So when he says this to them as he's teaching in the temple, they don't understand what's going on with him here. So they didn't know the leader's plot to kill him. Now, go back again why they wanted to kill him. Perhaps what happened in John chapter 5 when he was in Jerusalem before. But he uses an example. He says, the Sabbath is to be holy. No work to be done on the Sabbath day. Okay? Fixed. That's a rule. Nothing to be done on the Sabbath day. But the law also says that all children of Abraham, all male children born to the seed of Abraham, to the Jews, will be circumcised on the 8th day. Now, what if the 8th day falls on the Sabbath? What are you going to do? Can't do anything on the Sabbath, but the law says circumcised on the 8th day. So that's kind of the thing he lays out before him here. And he said, I heal on the Sabbath. Now, you would do the circumcision on the Sabbath, but why can't I make the man whole on the Sabbath? He said, I trying to use this to get them to understand what he's doing on the Sabbath versus what they would do, even though it appeared to violate the law of the Sabbath. So he talks to them about using righteous judgment. We'll touch on that again in a minute too. So then the question comes up about where is Jesus from? And it appears they didn't know where he's from, really behind the scenes. I mean, the down deep where he's from. The question comes up, can anybody do more signs than he does? Well, what's the answer to that? Last quarter, if you were in here, how many times did we list on the screen the miracles he's done? The blind see, the lame walk, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and we use that word immediately over and over and over and over and over. When Jesus healed, he healed all these miracles he had done. And of course, others hadn't seen it, but the apostles had seen him still the storms, walk on the water. I mean, can anybody do more things that he's done? Then he tells them, I'm going where you can't find me. Well, if he's speaking, I'm going back to the Father. Well, again, they get confused. They say, oh, where's he going? Is he going to leave and go out to the dispersion? Is he going to go out to those who have gone out and live among the Gentiles, and among the Greeks? Again, they don't understand where he's going with this. So now it comes down to the last day of the feast. And Jesus is preaching. And if anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. Which immediately reminds me of John chapter 4, of course, with the woman at the well and the discussion about the water. Or we can think about John 6 and I'm the bread of life and the discussion that went on there we talked about. Those who believe will receive the Spirit. Now, the Holy Spirit had not yet come. We think about that in Acts chapter 2, verse 4, when the Spirit came on the apostles there. And again, Jesus had not yet been glorified. That's another point he makes here about this. If you look in the book of John particularly, you see after you get over to about chapter 17 and forward, as he gets closer and closer to the time of the crucifixion, that he talks a lot more about glorifying him. He's going to glorify the Father. Father, glorify me. And that gets later on as it gets down. We'll get to that a little later. Closer and closer to the time of the crucifixion. So now they're still trying to figure out who he is. And some are convinced. And that's one of the points Steve's making this morning on the radio. Some are convinced that he's the Christ. Because of the miracles he's done, because of the teaching he's done, they're convinced that he is the Christ. Others are very doubtful, very skeptical. And of course, the Jewish leaders wanted to kill him all this time. So you got very, very mixed feelings about who he is at this point. So the question comes up about where he's from. It said, if he's a Messiah, he's got to come from Bethlehem. He's got to be the seed of David, which will be from Bethlehem. This man's from Galilee. That's where he spent all his time living, growing up. Most of his ministry spent in Galilee. So they picture him as being a Galilean. Well, he can't be the Christ because the Christ would have to come from the seed of David, from Bethlehem. So people are very divided. We'll get back to that point in a minute. Kind of clean it up a little bit. People are very divided about who he is. So that's kind of what this whole chapter is about. It's the different understandings about who Jesus is at this point in time. Now, in the meantime, the soldiers, this would be the soldiers of the Sanhedrin, the guards of the Sanhedrin, not the Roman soldiers. They don't come into play till much later on. The soldiers have been sent to get Jesus. The chief priest, Sanhedrin, said, go get him and bring him back to us. And they came and they heard some of this teaching we've been talking about just now. Stood there and listened to it as they went to arrest him. And they came back without him. They went back to the Sanhedrin and, well, where is he? Why didn't you bring him back? And they said, we never heard anybody teach like him before. I mean, we couldn't arrest him, but we were just startled there or amazed at his teaching. So they came back without him. So then they accused them of, but do you believe in him also then? I mean, like, are you going to fall for this teaching type thing he's doing here? And then Nicodemus spoke up. Who's Nicodemus? The Lord had him back when? John chapter what? Where's Nicodemus? Somebody come on and help me out here. Where's Nicodemus talked about? John chapter 3. The new birth. Everybody knows that. Everybody's just afraid to talk. Nicodemus spoke up. Nicodemus is on the Sanhedrin. He's one of them. So he speaks up and says, you know, do we accuse a man without a trial? Basically, it's what he's asking. You know, you've already got him. You've already got him ready to kill him here. We haven't even brought him in and had a trial yet. We've got to judge him. It's our thing to judge a man fairly. So some of the other Sanhedrin turn on Nicodemus then. It seems like, well, you're going to believe in him also? I mean, why are you questioning this thing? So they're back to this point now that nothing good can come out of Galilee. They don't realize that Jesus, of course, was born in Bethlehem, but no prophet ever came out of Galilee. That's what they said. Well, that's wrong to start with. You go back and look at 2 Kings 14. Jonah, a prophet, was from one of the cities in Galilee. And there's very definite prophecy that Christ would come from Galilee. There's a prophecy in Isaiah chapter 9, verses 1 and 2, that talks specifically about prophet coming out of Galilee. And then in Matthew chapter 4, that prophecy, Matthew chapter 4, 13 through 16, that prophecy is directly linked to Christ. So Isaiah makes a prophecy many years ago that there would be in the Galilee of the Gentiles, darkness has seen a great light. That's Isaiah chapter 9, verses 1 and 2. And then it's applied specifically to Jesus in Matthew chapter 4, that which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, from the land of Zebulun, land of Naphtali. And he quotes this prophecy then. So there would be a prophet come out of Galilee. They just wouldn't expected it. And that's not where they would expect the prophet to come from. So that kind of winds up chapter 7. Again, just a lot of mixed feelings about how the different people feel about Jesus at this point. From the leaders wanting to kill him, to some of the people believing he is the Christ, to others are questioning, well, how can he be the Christ because of where he came from, and not understanding he really was born in Bethlehem, he was the seed of David, and listen to him teach. Even the Sanhedrin guard gets confused. And so that's where we leave chapter 7. Anybody got thoughts about 7? All right. As we move into chapter 8, we go get kind of the first half of it, the class today. Scene changes a little bit as they bring this woman to Jesus who was caught. the text says, in the very act of adultery. Caught in the very act of adultery. So they bring her to Jesus. Now, couple of points we thought about. What was the punishment for someone caught in the act of adultery? Under the law of Moses. In most cases, it was death. Okay, there were a couple of exception type things, but death. Now, keep in mind, they can't kill anybody. They don't have that right because of the Roman control. But it was to be death. But not just for the woman. Who else would get the same punishment? The man. Okay? Nothing said this chapter about the man. Don't know if he was some prominent Jewish leader that they would get involved, if he had fled. I don't say I could have fled. He may have fled when they got there, but she's caught in the very act of adultery. He'd had to be there to start with, it seems like. But he's gone. He's not mentioned the whole point. They bring this woman to Jesus and set her in front of him here. Again, under Roman law, Jews cannot execute anyone. So what's really going on here? Was a woman in sin? Yeah, the scripture is pretty plain that she was caught in the act of adultery, right? So, yes, she was. Well, the law demand death. What's the Pharisees after here? Why even get Jesus involved in it? If you got a woman, she's caught in the act of adultery, go deal with it. Why is Jesus even getting involved in this thing? Well, it's the Pharisees. What they're trying to do with it. They would trick him, trap him, see what he'll say that they can use against him. Whatever. So they bring this woman to Jesus. Well, he's one that's going to show compassion and mercy. Just kind of see how it plays out. First, when they come up, what Jesus do to her? It's just not like, I think of a kid's drawing designs in the dirt or something here. They can look up, they didn't recognize it. It cut any doors to start with. They come up. Eventually, when he stands up, after they made this charges against this lady, he says, one little thing. Okay, which one of y'all was without sin? You go cast the first stone. Now, was he saying you shouldn't punish her? Was he saying you should punish her? How are they going to trap him with that? He didn't say, no, you shouldn't punish her now. He said, oh, yes, be sure and go stone her to death. Then he said, which one of you is without sin? You go cast the first stone. Now, but Deuteronomy 17:7. It says, hang on, let me flip the next page over here. Deuteronomy 17:7 basically says, I'll find my paper here, that it is the responsibility of the witness to cast the first stone. Okay? So it's an important point to think. That whoever witnessed the adultery was to cast the first stone. And then the congregation, this is going back to the law of Moses, the congregation would come in and stone the woman to death, or the man to death. But the witnesses were to cast the first stone. That way somebody else can just go out there and take somebody and say, I accuse you of adultery, and start throwing, it had to be the witness. So, lawful justice would be for the witness, whoever saw her, cast the first stone. But Jesus is basically calling our bluff. Okay? You caught her an act of adultery? You want to punish her? You go do it. But they all left after he made this statement. From the oldest to the youngest. And look why it says they left. Right there in the text. They were convicted by their own conscience. I don't know if I've ever noticed that before or not. They were convicted by their own conscience. That's why they all just started leaving. What did they know? They knew they didn't bring her to Jesus for justice. That was not why they came. Why did they come? They came to trick him, to trap him, to find something against him. The whole motive was wrong. Okay? So when the woman left, Jesus says, neither do I condemn you. Now, did he condemn the adultery? Absolutely. No doubt about that at all. Why did he not condemn her? He wasn't the witness. Okay? He wasn't the witness. Now, what did he tell her to do? Go your way and sin no more. And that next line on the slide up there, bottom line, I changed. Because the last time I did this, I think I had a thing that says forgiveness and mercy on there. But I didn't find anything in here about forgiveness. Did Jesus mention forgiveness about her sin at all in this chapter? I didn't see it. Now, could Jesus have forgiven her sins? We've already had examples of that, right? Where he talked to the man and said, thy sins are forgiven thee, and he was challenged by the Pharisees. He said, rise, take up your bed, and walk. So, Son of Man have power on earth to forgive sins? Could he have forgiven her sins? He could have. There's nothing said about it. He just told her to go and don't sin anymore. So, this is not about justice for the sin she committed. That's not the point. The whole point is the hypocrisy of these Jewish leaders, of what they're trying to accomplish. And Jesus showed her mercy. Because I don't know, I kind of debated it in my mind a whole lot when I changed that line on my slide there. Again, he said, don't sin anymore. Now, there was ways for her to get forgiveness on the law of Moses. And she could have done that, okay, without him forgiving her. So I don't know. I just know he said, don't go and sin anymore. Change your life, change what you've been doing. So. Then he gets one of the I ams here. He says, I am the light of the world. Follow me and you won't walk in darkness. We've already had several things from the I ams in John. He says here. And they accuse him now of bearing witness of himself. You say who you are, in other words. Well, the law requires two witnesses. Two or more. So Jesus says, I have two witnesses. Yes, I bear witness of myself, but who else bears witness of me? My Father does. Okay? And that's his second witness with what the Father is doing through him and what the things he said about him through the prophecies and all the things going on there. So Jesus said, I have the two witnesses there. And then the statement's made, no one came to arrest him at this point because, that same phrase is seen before, my hour is not yet come. It's not time for it. It's not time in God's plan yet for them to come arrest him and take him. Okay, that kind of covers what we got to do. Thoughts from anybody? That's something I missed. Talk about. A couple of thoughts right quick. The whole, one of the things in John chapter 7 is here, they didn't know him. They didn't know where he was from. Thought he was a Galilean, and he was raised and been in Galilee. But they did not know where he came from, Bethlehem. Why was that important? Why should they have known that he was born in Bethlehem and came from Bethlehem? Well, all the prophecies have said, where's the Messiah coming from? If they had known this, if the scribes and priests had been teaching the people the law, as they should have, and the prophets, and the people had learned it and listened, they would have recognized, oh, the Messiah is coming from Bethlehem, and they recognized who Jesus was. So the question is, do we ever get charged similarly like that? Do we ever not know something we should know about Jesus? There's something that, oh, if I'd have known that, if I'd have recognized that, if I'd really studied this and could have recognized that point, then I might. So kind of see the point I'm getting into here. They didn't know who he was. They couldn't recognize him because they didn't know where he was coming from. What do we not know that we should know? Now, the Jews were using the law with this woman, chapter 8. Jesus was showing mercy, compassion. The question is, did Jesus violate the law by not stoning this adulteress? Well, the obvious answer is going to be no, because we say, well, Jesus didn't sin, we know that. But how did he not do this? So how do we mix today law and mercy? Gardner Hall's got a whole book out on this point about law and mercy. I'll tell you a real quick story that kind of fits into this a little bit. I got one more slide. So Andy Griffith the other day, one of his episodes, and he was talking to Opie about some little problem Opie had had. He's trying to get Opie to understand something. To illustrate it, he says, Opie, there's a small lake. The sign says no swimming. The little boy goes in and goes swimming. But he shouldn't have. And he gets out in the middle of the lake and he's about to drown. He's hollering and screaming and he's drowning. And as a man comes up, and he sees the no swimming sign. So, is he going to obey the no swimming sign, or is he going to go save the boy? Law versus mercy here. So how do we mix these two today? And I'm going to jump ahead before we talk about that anymore. And how does it affect us in dealing with sin in the church today? I've got 1 minute to get into this, so I'm not going to get into it, because last Sunday night, Steve's lesson was on withdrawing from people who sin. And there were several questions asked. I'll give you a glimpse of what's happening tonight. Several questions asked of Steve after that. So tonight he's going to talk about it some more, he told me. Address some of the questions that were asked of him last week about this. Because some of these same things here come into that. How do we deal with sin in the church and do what we should be and yet be merciful to people? That's the point I'm trying to get to. Or be mixed sin and mercy. And of course, Romans 16, I stuck it there because it says, greet one another with a holy kiss. I did that just to show that the relationship we should have with one another. And then, of course, the other two passages on the screen up here are the ones Steve used last Sunday night about withdrawing from someone, discipline, keep the church pure, etc. So how do we mix these two? So, okay. Exactly time for the bell. I'll leave you with that to think about. So now you kind of get a shot of what Steve's going to talk about tonight a little bit more. So, think it's Wednesday night, so we'll have lesson 2 next Sunday morning. Okay. Thank you.